The Varick Empire had never retreated until the day it met one broken ship that was just trying to go home. The Daler Hollow was not a destination anyone chose. It was not beautiful. It was not useful. It sat between two burned-out stellar corpses on no shipping lane and no patrol route, and no chart that anyone with real authority in the galaxy had ever bothered to mark as important. It was a long, lightless corridor of gravitational instability, a region where space itself seemed to have grown bored and settled into the quiet business of being unpredictably hostile. Radiation pockets drifted through it like weather with no season. Gravitational currents reversed without announcement. The nearest stars were ancient and dim, the kind that gave off light the way an old man gives off warmth. Not much. Not on purpose. Not with any real hope it would reach you. The ISV caching had been sitting in the hollow for 11 days, not by choice. The choice had been to survey the gravitational distortions along the hollow's eastern corridor, a mapping mission, low priority. Funded by a university research coalition and a modest Earth government science grant that had taken 3 years to approve and would take another 2 years to fully report on. The cache was that kind of ship. The mission was that kind of mission. Nobody sent their finest vessel to chart anomalies in a dead zone. They sent the cache in. She was not young. She had been built 26 years ago for deep space geological analysis. Then she had been sold, then refitted for long-range survey work, then sold again, then refitted again, then acquired by the Earth Research Directorate at a price that accurately reflected how thoroughly everyone else had given up on her. Her hull carried patches in 14 locations. Her sensor array was military era. That was the one extravagant thing about her, because without strong sensors, a survey vessel was simply an expensive way to drift very slowly through darkness. Her crew quarters were small. Her coffee machine had been broken since a Tuesday. Not a recent Tuesday, a Tuesday some months back that nobody could precisely identify because the repair had been deferred each time in favor of something that mattered more. She carried 12 people and supplies enough for 8 months. She also carried in her core section a gravitational mapping array that was simultaneously the most sophisticated and the most temperamental piece of equipment on board. On day 4 of the survey, it had developed a feedback resonance that no one in the technical literature had described, and Naviad Asari had been working to correct it ever since. Core filed his monitoring reports at 300 station time. That was when the Council relay signal reached its clearest strength, and the rest of the observation post was quiet. He had been a Council observer for 11 years, assigned to a small platform at the edge of the Dela system, specifically because nothing ever happened there. He was very skilled at writing reports about nothing. He considered this a professional virtue. His reports were thorough and accurate and completely unread by anyone with authority, which suited him. He wrote them because the Council required them, and because the act of careful observation gave him something that resembled peace. He watched, he recorded, he filed. On day 11 of the Cashin's presence in the hollow, his report read as follows: Human Survey Vessel ISV Cache and Registry Earth Research Directorate has maintained a stationary position in the Eastern Hollow Zone for 11 standard days. Vessel appears to be performing equipment maintenance following a reported array malfunction. No distress transmission has been issued. No contact has been requested. Crew complement 12. No armament recorded. Vessel classification non-military research grade. Threat assessment none. Recommend continued passive observation. He filed it. He made himself something warm to drink. He watched the cache on his long-range display. A small and dim shape, barely a signal, sitting very still in a place where nothing ever happened. He did not know yet that in approximately 6 hours everything about his job was going to become something entirely different. Inside the cache, Naviad Asari was having a conversation with a panel, not with a person, with a specific section of conduit housing located behind service plate G9 in the engine deck subfloor. He had been speaking to it for 4 hours in a low and steady voice, the way a person speaks to an animal that has wedged itself somewhere it should not be. "I hear you," he said. "I understand what you are trying to do. You want the resonance to discharge through the primary array housing. And I am telling you with complete clarity that this cannot happen, because if it does, we lose the array entirely. And if we lose the array, we are a very expensive rock." The conduit did not reply. Navid wiped the sweat from his forehead with his wrist and looked at the diagnostic screen resting on his knee. The numbers were not favorable. They had not been favorable for 4 days. Every correction he made produced a new complication downstream, which was the engineering equivalent of a sentence that kept generating new clauses without ever arriving at a full stop. He was not panicking. Navid Asari did not panic. He had been an engineer for 19 years on ships worse than this one, in situations stranger than this. He had a philosophy about broken machines that had never failed him. Everything that broke was trying to communicate something. You simply had to stay with it long enough to hear what it was saying. What the cache's gravitational array was currently saying was something highly technical and entirely unhelpful. He was considering his next approach when the intercom broke the silence. Navid. Captain Dar's voice, even measured. The specific flatness that only appeared when it was working hard to stay flat. Still working. He said, "I know that is not why I'm calling." A pause with weight behind it. "We have company." Dra was standing at the bridge viewport when he arrived. That alone told him everything he needed to know about what she was feeling. She only stood at the viewport when she needed something to look at that was not a screen. She was a tall woman, lean, short hair shot through with gray that she had stopped trimming somewhere around week 2 of the mission and had not commented on since. She had a face that had probably been striking once and was now something more than that specific, like a landscape that had been through weather. Navid looked at the main display. 43 contacts, large, moving in formation. Vitai said Veth, she confirmed. He studied the contacts for a moment. Then he looked at her. How long at their current speed? 2 hours, perhaps less if they accelerate. She turned from the viewport. They are aimed at the Sorin system. There is a species there, the Quellin. 3 inhabited worlds. No real fleet to speak of. The Veeth have been building justification for 6 months. And we are in the way. We are in the area. She sat down in her chair, not directly in their path, but close enough that they will want us gone before whatever they have planned begins. Chella came in from the corridor behind them with a data tablet in her hand and her hair coming loose in 3 directions at once. She was 29 and operated at a frequency slightly above that of most humans, as if her brain ran on a different fuel source and occasionally forgot it was attached to a body. I have been studying the formation, she said without greeting. It is a standard Vet assault configuration. The 3 heaviest vessels at the front are Dreadnought class. The outer ring is destroyer escorts. She looked up. They are not here to talk. No, Dar said. They are not. She looked at Navid. How long until we can move? Define move. Propulsion. The mechanism that takes us somewhere other than here. Navid made a sound that fell short of a word. The feedback resonance in the grav array is still active. If I fire the main drive now, the power surge will travel through the array housing and we lose sensors possibly permanently. And if the problem remains, we stay exactly where we are. Dra looked at the display. The 43 contacts continued their approach. She regarded them the way she regarded most terrible things, directly without flinching, as if flinching would somehow make them worse. How long to fix it properly? 8 hours, maybe 10. We have 2. I know. She nodded once. Do what you can. Navid went back to the engine deck. Chella followed him without being invited, which she always did, and which he had long ago stopped resisting because she was occasionally useful and always unpredictable. Like a very energetic instrument that sometimes handed you exactly the right thing without being asked. He lay back down under plate G9. Walk me through the resonance again, Chella said. She sat cross-legged on the floor next to him with her tablet. The grav array maps external gravitational fields by generating a small internal one as a reference baseline. The feedback means the internal field keeps amplifying instead of stabilizing. Every time I try to interrupt it, the energy routes. Where does the rooted energy go? Right now it dissipates through the hull plating mostly harmlessly. He paused on the word mostly. Cella was quiet for a moment. He could hear her thinking. It was a real sound, a rapid tapping of stylus on tablet that meant her brain was doing something significant. What if you did not interrupt it? She said. He stopped working. What? What if you allowed the resonance to amplify, but instead of letting it root through the hull, you gave it somewhere to go? Rooted into the propulsion coupling. Navid was silent for 4 full seconds. That would mean the drive would not be running on reaction thrust. It would be running on a localized gravity field. Roughly, yes. That is not how drives function. It is not how drives are designed to function. Keller said that is different. He thought about it. Teller's ideas had a particular quality. They were never quite safe, and they were never quite wrong, which put them in a category of their own that he had privately labeled correct, but alarming. The field would be unstable, he said. We would move, but not in a predictable way. We would move, she said. Is that not the requirement? He did not answer. He was already recalculating. The VT hail came at 1 hour and 40 minutes. Dara took it on the main screen. The face that appeared was sharp and angular, reptilian in the way all Veth were scaled skin in deep olive and brown eyes with a vertical pupil that had always struck her as the eyes of something that had learned patience through necessity. The uniform was heavily decorated. The expression was not unregistered vessel. The translator stripped his voice of inflection. You are occupying a restricted transit corridor. You will clear this zone within 10 of your minutes, or you will be removed. Dara looked at him steadily. She had dealt with Veeth before, not often and not well, but enough to understand that they did not bluff. When they said remove, they intended it in the permanent sense. This is Captain Dar Solon of the ISV Cashin. She said, Earth Research Directorate. We are a registered survey vessel currently conducting emergency drive repairs. We have every intention of clearing the area. We are working on it. A pause. The Vet Commander. She noted the rank insignia. 3 horizontal bars. A Fleet Admiral. He glanced at something off-screen. You have 10 minutes. He said he ended the transmission. Dara turned to her communications officer. Get me Navi. Navied's voice came through at once, which meant he had been listening. I heard 10 minutes. I know. Can you do it in 10 minutes? A pause precisely long enough to be honest. I can do something in 10 minutes. Whether what I do qualifies is a philosophical question. At 9 minutes and 40 seconds, Navi did something to the Cashin that was not a sound exactly and not a sensation exactly. It was the kind of thing that happened in the bones before it reached the ears. A deep, low vibration that began in the floor and traveled upward through every chair and into the spine of every person sitting in one. The lights flickered once. The main display scrambled and reassembled itself. And then the ship moved, not forward, not backward. Not in any direction with a clean name. The Kashion seemed to compress itself, or the space around it compressed. Cella would spend the following 6 months debating the correct terminology with herself and others. And then the vessel was somewhere slightly different from where it had been. And the transition had taken 0.2 seconds and involved no thrust whatsoever. On the bridge, Dara gripped her armrest. Navi, she said. Still here, he said. He sounded out of breath. What did you do? I'm not entirely certain, he said, but I believe the drive is running on the local gravity field. On the Vet fleet sensors, 43 ships watch the cache vanish and reappear and vanish again, not moving along any line, not moving in any pattern that their targeting computers could model, appearing and disappearing in positions that formed no vector, suggested no direction, matched no drive signature in any database the Vest Dominion had assembled across 600 years of expansion. Fleet Admiral Sareen stared at his display. His targeting officer looked up. Admiral, we cannot establish a firing solution. Sareen said nothing. Admiral, the vessel is the vessel is. The officer stopped, tried again. The vessel is not moving in a way our targeting systems can predict. The display showed the cache appearing, disappearing, appearing elsewhere. No engine wash, no propulsion signature, no heat bloom, no particle trail, nothing. Just a ship that existed in one position, and then did not exist, and then existed again somewhere else, with no evidence of transit connecting those positions. Saren watched it for 30 seconds. He had commanded fleets for 22 years. He had fought in 17 engagements. He had never in the entirety of his career instructed his targeting officer to hold fire because the target was confusing him. "Hold fire," he said. "Observe." The order went to 43 ships. 43 ships held. On his observation platform, Korth watched all of this on his long-range sensors, with the careful attention he brought to everything, and with a growing understanding that his next report was going to require a great deal of very precise language. He began writing amendment to previous filing. The human vessel ISV Cashin has undergone a propulsion event of unknown classification. The vessel is exhibiting positional behavior inconsistent with any known drive technology. The Veth Dominion fleet, comprising 43 vessels in assault configuration, has halted its advance and is currently in observation posture. He stopped. He read it back. He added one more line. "I cannot determine what the human vessel is doing. I am also unable to determine whether the human vessel knows what it is doing." He filed it. Then he poured himself something warm and sat back at his display and watched the small, battered, flickering human ship that had just caused 43 Vith warships to stand very still and very quiet in the dark between dead stars. He watched it for a long time. Outside, the hollow was silent. The dead stars gave their dim light. The Vith fleet held its position, and the Cashin kept flickering. Here, then not here, then here again. Like something that had not yet decided what the rules were, and felt no particular urgency to find out. The Vet Dominion had doctrine for everything. This was not an exaggeration. In 600 years of expansion across 40% of known space, the Dominion had encountered enough strange situations and hostile species and unexpected complications that someone at some point had written a protocol for nearly all of them. There were doctrines for first contact, doctrines for siege warfare, doctrines for handling civilian vessels in restricted zones, doctrines for equipment failure mid-en engagement, for communications blackouts, for crew mutiny, for the 17 different types of spatial anomaly the Dominion Science Division had catalogued and named. There was even a doctrine for vessels that did not comply with orders. It was a brief doctrine. It had one step. Fleet Admiral Saren knew all of them. He had memorized them as a junior officer and refined his understanding of them through 2 decades of command. He believed in them the way some beings believed in structure itself, not blindly, but with the deep earned faith of someone who had witnessed what happened when doctrine was followed and what happened when it was not, and had kept careful score. He was thinking about all of this now, standing at the front of his command deck, watching the display where the human vessel continued doing the unnamed thing status. He said his sensor officer, a young male named Versailles, who had the unfortunate trait of looking exactly as frightened as he felt, looked up from his station. "Vessel continues to exhibit non-standard positional behavior. Admiral, current count 47 displacement events in the last 18 minutes. Pattern." Versailles hesitated. "There is no pattern, Admiral. I mean, there is no predictive pattern. The displacements are not random. They appear." He stopped. "They appear purposeful, Admiral, but we cannot model the purpose." Saren turned back to the display. The human ship sat there, or did not sit there exactly, because sitting implied stillness, and this vessel was not still. Even when it appeared to be, it shimmered at the edges of his senses. It existed in a way that kept sliding out of definition. "Weapons," he said. His weapons officer, older, steadier. A veteran named Korth, who had served with him for 9 years, pulled up the targeting array. "Targeting solution is incomplete. Admiral, the system cannot achieve a stable lock. Every projection places the vessel in a position it has already vacated by the time the calculation resolves. How long to force a lock?" Koreth looked at his screen. Then at Saren. "Unknown Admiral, The targeting algorithm is iterating. It has not converged. Saren was quiet. In 22 years of command, he had never waited this long for a firing solution on a single unarmored research-grade vessel. He clasped his hands behind his back. Continue observing. In the engine room of the cache, the situation was most accurately described as controlled chaos, with the balance between those two words shifting depending on which precise second you evaluated. Navidid was back under plate G9. He had not left the engine deck in 6 hours. He had eaten half a nutrition block and drunk 2 cups of water. At some point, someone had placed a cup of actual coffee near his elbow, which meant Dar had come down personally because nobody else on the ship made coffee that bad. And somehow it was still the most comforting thing he had encountered all day. The gravitational array was humming. That was the word that kept coming to him. He kept dismissing it, because engineers did not use that word, but it was accurate. The array had found a frequency, a resonance between the feedback loop and the propulsion coupling, something Tella had suggested, and he had implemented with approximately 30% confidence and 60% desperation. The result was a vibration he felt in his back teeth. It was not supposed to do that. A great many things that were not supposed to be happening were happening. Sella, he said. She was 3 feet from him, sitting on an equipment case with her legs folded under her, her tablet connected directly to the array's secondary sensor feed. She had been in that position for 2 hours. She had the expression of someone watching the most remarkable thing they had ever seen, and working very hard not to wake it by reacting too strongly. Still here, she said. Tell me what the field is doing. It is beautiful, she said. That is not a technical description. It is bending local space, she said, switching without apology. The array generates a reference gravity field as a baseline for mapping. Normally that field is tiny and controlled and barely measurable, but the feedback loop amplified it past the containment threshold. And when you routed it into the propulsion coupling, the drive began using that field instead of reaction thrust. She paused. The ship is not moving through space. It is moving space. Navi stared at the conduit in his hands. That is not possible. We do not have the power generation for that. We do not have the power generation for a stable version of that, she said. What we have is an unstable version that keeps spiking and releasing. Every spike moves the ship. Every release drops it back into normal space. The interval between spikes is irregular because the feedback loop has no fixed period. She looked up from her tablet to any external sensor. We are appearing and disappearing at irregular intervals in positions that correspond to no known drive vector. Navid thought about this for a long moment. Can anyone outside this room lock onto us? Shella smiled. It was the smile of someone who had just finished a calculation they enjoyed enormously. No. On the bridge, Dara was learning the particular kind of patience required when you were in danger and could do nothing about the danger except wait for someone else to fix the thing that had created the danger. She was not skilled at this variety of patience. She was skilled at the kind that involved action, making calls, pulling data, making decisions. The waiting kind had always felt like wearing a coat one size too small. She sat in her chair and watched the Veth fleet on the display and showed none of it on her face. They have not moved her communications. Officer said a young woman named Fiora, 24 years old, on her first deep space posting, holding herself together well. Her voice was only slightly too careful. No, Dar said. Do you think they will fire? Dar looked at the 43 contacts spread across her display. 3 ships. The smallest of them was 3 times the cache's mass. The largest was something she preferred not to calculate. If they could, she said they would have already. Fra was quiet. Why can't they? As if answering the thought directly, the intercom clicked. Navit's voice slightly muffled, as if he were speaking from inside something. Dar, talk to me. Short version. The drive is working, but not in a way I can direct precisely. We are moving, but not predictably. Sella says, no one outside can lock onto us. Can you steer? A pause with texture in it. Define steer. Can you make us move generally away from 43 vet warships? Another pause. I can make us move in a direction. Whether it is the correct direction requires some testing. Test toward away from them, working on it. The intercom went quiet. Dara looked at the display. The fleet was still holding. She pulled up her reference files on vet military doctrine. She had read them once 2 years ago for a completely different reason. She found the section on non-compliant vessels in restricted zones. She read it twice. The doctrine was unambiguous. Vessels failing to comply with withdrawal orders were to be destroyed. No exceptions, no additional warnings. The vet fleet had not destroyed them. She sat with that fact for a moment. Then she understood it. And the understanding was a cold and careful thing that settled at the base of her spine. They had not fired because they could not get a lock. And they could not get a lock because the caisson in its broken and improvised state had become something their targeting systems had no model for. They were not safe. They were a category error. Sarin gave the order at the 90-minute mark. He did not give it lightly. He had spent 90 minutes observing, gathering data, waiting for his targeting systems to resolve, arriving at the conclusion the way a structural engineer arrives at the conclusion that a bridge is failing slowly, carefully, with a reluctance that does not change the math. The resolution was not coming. All batteries, he said. Fire at last, confirmed position, spread pattern, maximum dispersal. It was not a precise order. He knew it was not precise. He was not firing to strike the vessel. He had accepted in a quiet and deeply uncomfortable part of his mind that striking the vessel was not currently achievable. He was firing to saturate space, to fill the area around the vessel so completely with weapons fire that even an unpredictable target could not avoid all of it. It was the kind of order you gave when the doctrine had been exhausted. 43 ships fired. The space surrounding the caisson became briefly a solid geometry of energy. Plasma charges and kinetic rounds and particle beams crossing and recrossing the zone in a pattern designed to eliminate all empty volume. At the moment of firing, the cache's grab array spiked. This was not a response. This was not a countermeasure. This was navied 3 seconds before the order was given, yanking a coupling free because the feedback frequency had shifted and he needed to redirect the power draw before the array burned out its secondary housing. The ship displaced 4,300 kilon or so. The salvo struck empty space. The silence on Sarin's command deck was the loudest thing he had ever heard. Every officer was looking at their station, not at him, at their stations. Because looking at him meant acknowledging that he was looking back, and what was on his face was not something any of them wanted to have witnessed. Damage assessment. He said his voice was even. He had excellent control of his voice. No confirmed strikes. Admiral Kaur said the vessel displaced at the moment of firing. Displaced. Yes, Admiral. How far? Approximately 4,300 kilometers. And Kaur paused in no direction corresponding to any vector projected from its previous position. Serene looked at the display. The caisson had reappeared on the far side of the engagement zone, not retreating, not advancing, simply present where it had not been with no evidence of how it had arrived there. Reacquire, he said. Working Admiral. They worked for 14 minutes. At the end of 14 minutes, Sarin's targeting officer looked up with the expression of a man delivering information he would genuinely prefer not to deliver. Admiral, we cannot establish a firing solution. The vessel's positional behavior remains outside targeting parameters. Sarin said nothing. Admiral, our systems have run 11,000 iterations of the targeting algorithm. Snorts. In every iteration, by the time the solution resolves, the vessel has displaced. We cannot. He stopped. We cannot hit it, Admiral. Another silence. From somewhere at the back of the deck, someone junior said very quietly, "What is it doing?" No one answered. In the engine room, Sella had begun making sounds. Not words exactly, sounds. A rapid, high-pitched sequence of syllables that had the rhythm of language, but the content of pure experience. She was producing them while staring at her tablet and writing notes at speed. Navid had learned over the past 6 hours that this meant she had found something. "Chella, the field," she said. "The gravity field when it spikes. When we displace, it is not just moving us, it is moving space. The local metric shifts. She looked up. Her eyes were bright in the way that meant she had gone somewhere in her mind that most people could not follow. Do you understand what that means for anything caught at the shift boundary? It means they register a gravitational event, he said. It means they register a gravitational event their instruments cannot distinguish from a naturally occurring anomaly. She said, "We are not a ship to their sensors. We are a moving gravitational feature. We look like a piece of the hollow." Nav set his tool down. "We look like the hollow." He said, "Yes, they are trying to shoot a piece of geography." "Yes." He picked his tool back up. "Well," he said, "that explains that." Saren called High Command at the 2-hour mark. This was not casual. Fleet admirals did not call High Command from the field unless the situation required it. And situations that required it were, in his experience, situations that ended careers. He had called High Command twice in 22 years. Both occasions had been significant. This would be the third. He made the call from his private station off the command deck. He reported what had happened: the vessel, the displacement events, the failed targeting solutions, the salvo. He reported it without emphasis, because emphasis would have made it worse. When he finished, there was a long silence from the other end. "Then send us your sensor data." "I have already transmitted it." Saren said. Another silence. "Is the vessel armed?" "We have detected no weapon systems. Has it taken any aggressive action?" Saren considered the question. "It has not complied with the withdrawal order." He said, "Beyond that, no. Then what is it doing?" He looked at the sensor feed on his private screen, the cache and flickering, there and not there. A ship that moved like a gap in the data. "I do not know," he said. It was the first time in 22 years he had said those 3 words to High Command. He felt them leave him and understood they would not be coming back. High Command instructed him to hold position and await a specialist science vessel. The vessel was 2 hours out. It carried the Dominion's finest sensor analysts and the most advanced scanning technology in the fleet. Saren acknowledged the order, ended the transmission, sat alone in his private station for a moment longer than was necessary. Then he stood, straightened his uniform, walked back to the command deck. Kororeth had been watching for 2 hours. His tea had gone cold twice. He had not noticed either time. He was writing continuously, which was unusual. He was a careful and deliberate writer, a man who chose words the way a craftsman selected tools with attention to what they were meant to do. He did not write continuously. He was writing continuously. Amendment. Second filing. The Vet fleet executed a full battery firing solution against the human vessel. The solution was unsuccessful. The human vessel displaced the engagement zone entirely at the moment of firing. No damage observed. The vessel has reappeared at coordinates approximately 4,300 kilometers from its previous position. He stopped. "I want to note for the record that I have been observing this vessel for 11 days and have filed no fewer than 14 reports classifying it as non-threatening. I am not retracting those reports. I am noting that the classification of non-threatening may require subdivision." He stopped again. "The Vet fleet is holding position. They are not pursuing. They are not firing. They are watching." He looked at the display. The Cashion was still there, still flickering, still being whatever it was. In 11 years of observation, I have watched 3 Vet engagements. In each case, the Veth fired until the target was destroyed, and then the VTH departed. In no case did the Veth watch. They are watching. I find this more alarming than anything else I have observed today. He filed the report, looked at his cold tea, did not drink it. On the display, the cache shimmered and displaced and reappeared. And the 43 warships of the Veeth Dominion did nothing at all, which was somehow the most frightening thing in the dark. The science vessel was called the Dominion Clarity, and it was the finest thing the Vedath Dominion had ever built that was not designed to destroy something. It had taken 30 years to construct, Its sensor arrays could detect a single hydrogen atom at a distance of 10,000 kilometers. Its database banks held the complete scientific output of the Dominion across 6 centuries. Every measurement, every classification, every carefully documented phenomenon the vet had encountered as they moved across 40% of known space, and named things, and recorded them and filed them in the correct order. It arrived at the edge of the Daler Hollow at hour 3. Sliding into position behind Saren's fleet with the quiet confidence of something that knew it was the most sophisticated instrument in any room it entered. Its senior analyst was a female named Breath. She had spent 40 years studying anomalous spatial phenomena. She had written the Dominion's definitive work on non-standard drive signatures. She had personally catalogued 11 previously unclassified forms of gravitational distortion. She looked at the Cashion on her display for approximately 4 minutes. Then she said, "Run the full spectrum scan all bands. I want continuous data." Her team ran it. Breath watched the results arrive. She watched the caching displace. She watched it reappear. She watched the gravitational readings spike and release in their irregular pattern. She watched her instruments attempt to build a model of what they were detecting. Fail, then tried differently, fail again. She was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke carefully. The way a person speaks when they are committing to a position and understand they will be held to it. This vessel is generating a localized gravity fold, a controlled, directed, repeating gravity fold. The displacement events are the result of metric manipulation. The vessel is bending local space and using the distortion as propulsion. Her junior analyst, a young male named Pratt, who had served with her for 3 years and had learned to read the precise quality of her silences, said, "Is that possible? It is happening?" Breath said, "That makes it possible. We have never seen this before. We have never seen it before." She agreed. Which means either we have not been looking in the correct places, or she paused, or the humans developed it without us noticing. Pratt looked at the display at the small battered ship doing the impossible thing. "They have been spacefaring for 200 years. He said, "We have been spacefaring for 600. "Yes," Veith said, "they could not have." And yet she began composing her report to Saren. Her hands, Pratt noticed, were not entirely steady. Inside the cache, the situation was this. Navid was still under plate G9. He had been under it with brief intervals above it for going on 8 hours. His back hurt. His knees hurt. The specific joint in his right shoulder that had given him difficulty since a bad fall on a previous vessel had decided this was the moment to formally register its objection. He was ignoring all of it. The coupling he was currently holding had 3 possible configurations. Configuration 1 would restore standard drive function and shut down the gravity fold entirely, which would solve the engineering problem and leave them stationary in front of 43 warships. Configuration 2 would maintain the fold but reduce its stability, which would keep them moving but increase the risk of a catastrophic feedback event that Sella had described with the cheerful detachment of someone who found catastrophic feedback events genuinely interesting. Configuration 3. He had invented 10 minutes ago and was not yet certain about Ella. He said still. Here she said she had moved from the equipment case to the floor lying on her back with her tablet held above her face, which was how she worked when she was thinking hardest configuration 3. Tell me I route the power draw through the secondary coupling but leave the primary loop active. The fold continues, but the spike interval stabilizes. We get more predictable displacement. She was quiet for a moment. How predictable? Not very, but more than now. More than now. Another moment. What is the risk? If the secondary coupling cannot handle the draw, it fails. The energy has nowhere to go. It routes back through the array housing, and then, the array housing fails. The fold collapses. Drive goes offline. We stop moving. Sella considered this. What is the advantage if it works? Navid said. I can give Dara something closer to actual directional control. We can edge toward the hollow boundary. Not quickly, but with intention. Sella lowered her tablet and looked at the ceiling. Do it, she said. You are very relaxed about catastrophic failure. He said, I am very interested in what happened, she said. It is different. He had no good answer for that. He began configuration 3. Dara was on the bridge when Fiera flagged the new contact. Second vessel captain, smaller than the warships, different configuration. Fiera pulled up the profile. I believe it is a science vessel. Veth registry. It is taking position at the rear of the fleet. Dara looked at it. A science vessel. They had sent a science vessel. She thought about what that signified. The fleet could not classify what the cache was doing, so they had sent people whose purpose was classification. That was a reasonable response. It was also, in a way, she could not entirely articulate, more troubling than another warship would have been. More warships meant they wanted to fight. A science vessel meant they wanted to understand. Understanding led to solutions. How long has it been scanning us? About 6 minutes, Fear said. Full spectrum, all bands. Dara nodded. She pulled up the cache's current status on her display. Drive operational in the approximate sense. Hull intact. Crew 12 people. All accounted for. None of them happy. All of them functional. Supplies adequate. Coffee machine still broken. An ongoing separate tragedy. She called the engine deck. Navied. There is a vet science vessel scanning us. A pause. She could hear him working. The specific sound of tools in tight places. How sophisticated. Very. Are they going to determine what we are doing? She considered. Probably. She said, given sufficient time, how much time do we have? Less than we would prefer. Another pause. I am implementing something. Give me 20 minutes. You have 20 minutes, she said. She ended the call, sat back in her chair. Fiera was looking at her with the careful attention of someone who wanted to ask a question, but was not sure of the timing. Ask Dara said, if the science vessel determines what we are doing, Fiera said, if they determine that the drive malfunctioned and all of this is accidental, then they know we are not a threat. Dara said, then they know we have been sitting here unable to move, and everything they have witnessed is the consequence of a broken engine and one engineer improvising, and then they fire. And then they fire, Dara said. And Navit's modified drive cannot move us out of the path of 43 ships firing with a complete targeting solution. She paused. So, let us hope Navit's 20 minutes goes well. Fiera turned back to her station. Doctra looked at the display, at the science vessel scanning, at the fleet waiting, at the hollow beyond, dark and wide and entirely indifferent to all of them. She thought about the last time she had been genuinely frightened. She stopped thinking about it. The 20 minutes became 19 when Navi tried configuration 3 and the secondary coupling under the load he had projected, but somehow not quite believed, and made a sound like a very large and very unhappy animal, and then did something he had not anticipated. It held, but in holding it changed the draw pattern in a way that fed back into the primary loop at a different frequency. And the primary loop already running at something. It had never been designed to run at amplified that frequency. And the amplified frequency hit the propulsion coupling with approximately 3 times the energy Navi had intended. The cache and lurched. This was not a displacement. The previous movements had been relatively contained, short and sharp, and positionally precise. This was a lurch, a physical event that people registered in their bodies and their chairs and their inner ears. The ship moved forward 40,000 kilometers in 0.3 seconds without acceleration, without inertia. One moment, the Kashan occupied a position relative to the Vet fleet that could be described as close. The next moment, it occupied a position that could be described as somewhere else entirely, having crossed 40,000 kilometers in a third of a second, and every person on board had experienced it as a single instant of wrongness, a gap in the sensation of existing, and then it was over. On the bridge, Dara was gripping both armrests. Navid, she said. Her voice was very even here. He said he sounded like a man who had done something unexpected and was still determining whether it was beneficial or catastrophic. What was that? Configuration 3 had a secondary effect I did not model. Yes, she said. I noticed we moved 40,000 kilometers, Fra said, reading her display in 3 seconds of silence in the engine deck. Then, huh? Navidid said. Hadara agreed on the Dominion clarity. The effect of the cache's 40,000-kilometer displacement was immediate and absolute. The gravity fold when it spiked at 3 times. Its previous amplitude sent a shockwave through local space. Not a weapon, not a targeted event, a byproduct. The same way a ship moving through water sends a wave to the shore without meaning to reach the shore. The shockwave struck the Dominion clarity sensor arrays at full strength. Because the sensor arrays were by design maximally sensitive to exactly this kind of spatial disturbance. Maximally sensitive instruments receiving input 3 times larger than their calibrated maximum do not process the excess gracefully. Every sensor array on the Dominion clarity overloaded simultaneously. The power surge traveled through the array housing into the primary data systems. The primary data systems, which were the finest the Dominion had ever built, failed in sequence. Not catastrophically, not with fire, but cleanly and completely. The way a very precise instrument fails when asked to do something it was never constructed to do. The Dominion clarity went dark, not destroyed, not burning. Dark, silent, drifting, every instrument offline. 40 years of the Dominion's finest sensor technology sitting cold and useless in a vessel that was otherwise completely intact and completely blind. Breath sat in the sudden quiet of her command center and looked at the blank screens where her data had been. She did not speak for a very long time. Serene watched the Dominion clarity go dark on his display. He watched it the way a person watches something they have no category for, with complete external stillness and something happening behind his eyes that his expression was not reporting. Status of the Dominion clarity. He said his communications officer was already working on it. No response to Hale's Admiral. Power signature indicates full instrument failure. Hull is intact. Life support is active. A pause. They are alive, Admiral, but they are blind. What caused it? The human vessel's displacement event, the gravity spike. The shock wave from the metric shift overloaded their sensor arrays. His communications officer paused again in the way people paused when they were about to say something they were uncertain should be said. The communications officer held his gaze for a moment, then found something essential to examine on his display. It was not as far as we can determine a targeted strike. Sarin turned back to the main display. The Cachion sat 40,000 kilometers from where it had been. 40,000 kilometers in a third of a second with no drive signature his instruments could identify. And now, his science vessel was dark. And the most sophisticated sensor platform the Dominion had deployed was sitting blind in the middle of the hollow. And the human ship was simply there in its new position, doing the flickering thing being whatever it was. He opened a channel to the cache, waited. It took 4 seconds for a response. The face that appeared was the same one as before. The human female, the captain, the one who had told him she would love to clear the area and that her drive was broken. She looked, if anything, slightly more tired than before. There was something in her expression that he spent a moment attempting to classify, and then stopped. "Admiral," she said, not a question. "What Sarin said? Did you just do to my science vessel?" She looked at him for a moment. He watched her face move through something, a calculation or a decision or both. "I'm not authorized," he said. She said, "to discuss this vessel's capabilities." The words were even, calm. They carried no threat, no edge, no weight of any kind. They were simply a door closing. Sarin stared at her. She looked back at him, waiting. He ended the transmission. He stood at his station for a long time after. His crew did not speak. They had learned over 9 years what his silences meant. This one meant something none of them had language for yet. Kor, his weapons officer, the veteran, the steady one, came to stand beside him. Not to report, just to stand. Sarin did not look at him. Admiral Korth said very quietly. "Not now," Sarin said. Kor returned to his station. Sarin looked at the display, at the Cachion, at the blind science vessel drifting nearby, at his fleet, 43 ships, the finest military force the Dominion had deployed in the outer reach, sitting still while one small human vessel with no weapons on record moved in ways that rendered his targeting systems useless and his science vessel dark. He thought about doctrine. He thought about the part of doctrine that said, "Destroy what you cannot classify." He thought about the part of doctrine that did not say, because no one had ever needed to write it, what to do when destroying what you cannot classify is not possible. He thought about the call to high command, about the words, "I do not know." He thought about breath on the Dominion clarity sitting in the dark. He clasped his hands behind his back and watched the display and let himself, for the first time in 22 years of command, remain with something he did not understand without reaching immediately for the answer. Corps' third report was the longest he had ever filed. He had been writing it in real time as events developed, adding sections and amendments as each new thing happened, until it had become less a report and more a document, a record of something he was watching and could not stop watching. He filed it. Then he sat back and looked at the caption on his display. He had a habit when observing things he did not understand of describing them to himself in the simplest possible language. Not scientific language, plain language, the kind a person used when they were not attempting precision, but simply attempting truth. He looked at the caption. A small ship, old, patched in several locations his sensors could count. No weapons, no armor worth the name. 12 crew. A broken drive doing something nobody had a word for. It had been in the wrong place at the wrong moment. It had not tried to fight. It had not tried to run. It had just kept being there in its broken and flickering way. And the entire Veth fleet had not been able to do a thing about it. And the finest science vessel the Dominion had ever built was now sitting dark and blind 40,000 kilometers away. Not because the caption had tried to do any of that, because it had been trying to fix its engine. Corps sat with this for a moment. Then he added one final line to the report before transmitting. I want to note that I have now observed this vessel for the better part of one standard day. In that time, it has made no aggressive action, issued no threats, and as far as I can determine, has been entirely occupied with attempting to leave. I think it is important that the Council understand this. The Vet fleet cannot remove it, and it is just trying to leave. He transmitted the report, looked at the cold tea he still had not touched, drank it, made a face. Outside the hollow sat quiet and dark, and the caption flickered in it like a candle that had no idea. It was the only light anyone was looking at. The order took 4 hours to come. Saren did not give it quickly. He was not a man who made decisions from the place where fear lived, and he needed time to be certain that was not where this one was coming from. So he waited. He gathered what data he could from the Dominion clarity, which was not much because the Dominion clarity was still dark, and its crew was working to restore basic systems with whatever remained operational, which was less than they needed. He reviewed every displacement event the fleet cameras had captured. He ran his own calculations separate from his officers on a private terminal. He did not reach a conclusion. That was the problem. Every time he followed the data toward a conclusion, the data stopped making sense before he arrived. The human vessel was doing something. He knew it was doing something. He had watched it do it for the better part of a day. He could not name what it was, which meant he could not counter it, which meant everything the Dominion's military doctrine assumed about the relationship between understanding and defeating an enemy had at some point in the last several hours quietly stopped applying. He thought about the last time the Veth Dominion had withdrawn from an engagement. He had to reach back through history to find it. Not recent history, old history, the kind that lived in archives and was taught to young officers as a lesson about the price of miscalculation. The Battle of Saren's Passage 400 years ago, a navigational disaster rather than a military defeat. The fleet had not been beaten. It had been trapped by a collapsed transit point and forced to withdraw rather than accept destruction. The Dominion did not call it a retreat in the official histories. They called it a tactical redeployment in response to environmental conditions. Saren thought about that phrase for a long time. Then he went back to his command deck. He called his senior commanders to a joint channel. 6 individuals, all experienced, all people whose respect he had spent 22 years earning one engagement at a time. He looked at their faces on the screen. They looked back. He did not say retreat. "We will regroup," he said, "and reassess the nature of this contact." He kept his voice level, his face still. He put no particular weight on any word. "The situation requires information we do not currently possess. We will withdraw to a staging position outside the hollow boundary, consolidate our data, and await further instruction from High Command." He paused. Acknowledge. One by one they acknowledged. Their faces were careful, controlled. These were experienced officers. They understood what this was. Not one of them said the word either. When they were gone, Saren stood alone at his private station for a moment. He was aware of something he did not have a clean name for. Not shame exactly, not fear, not anger, though there were traces of all of them. It was closer to the sensation of a structure shifting, something he had built his understanding of the world upon, moving in a way structures were not supposed to move. He thought about the Cassian, about the captain's face, about the particular quality of her stillness when she had said she was not authorized to discuss the vessel's capabilities. He had been searching for deception in that face and had not found it. He had been looking for the specific confidence that came from knowing you had force behind you, and had not found that either. What he had found, and spent several hours attempting to classify, was something that looked almost like inconvenience. As if this entire situation was for her an interruption of something else she had intended to do. He could not make that make sense. He stopped trying. He went back to the command deck and gave the order to the fleet. 43 ships turned. It was not a dramatic thing from the inside. Large vessels did not spin on their axes. They moved with the heavy deliberateness of enormous objects, slow at first, then finding their momentum, the turn taking several minutes to complete, the formation reshaping as it did. Saren watched the process on his display the way he watched all things directly without looking away from what it was. 43 ships turning away from one unarmed research vessel. He watched until it was done. Then he looked at the display one final time at the Cassian, still there, still flickering, still being whatever it was. And then he turned away from it. He did not look again. Sella saw it first. She was still in the engine room, still on the floor, her tablet now connected to the long-range sensor feed because Navid had found a way to pipe the bridge display down to the subfloor. And she had not returned to the bridge in 6 hours and showed no indication of going. She was watching the fleet signatures because watching the fleet signatures was under the circumstances a reasonable thing to do. She watched them shift. She watched the formation change. She watched the vectors alter from static holding to motion. Moving away, she sat up. Navaj said he was elbow deep in the secondary coupling housing, still working. The fleet signatures were steady and clear. 43 contacts, all moving, all on vectors that led away from the hollow, away from the Cassian, away from the Sorin system. They had come to demonstrate force against moving with the unhurried heavy purpose of large ships that had decided somewhere else was where they needed to be. "They are really leaving," Sella said. "Yes," Navid said. A silence between them, not uncomfortable. The kind that arrives after a long and exhausting thing has stopped being quite so immediate. Then Chella said, "Do you think they know what? That it was an accident?" She looked at him. The drive, the fold, all of it. "Do you think they know it was not intentional?" "No," Navi said. He looked at the display again. "No, I do not think they know that." Chella was quiet for a moment. Then she said with the careful precision of someone arriving at a conclusion they find genuinely remarkable, "We accidentally frightened the VTH Dominion." "Yes," Navi had said, "with a broken engine. And your idea about the coupling and your implementation, which did not go as planned, which went better than planned." Salisa said, "Navied considered this in terms of outcome he allowed." "Yes." He set the tablet down and went back to the coupling housing. "Tell Dara," he said. Dra looked at her display for a long time after FRA told her. She was aware of something happening in her chest that she was not going to examine closely. It was not relief exactly. Relief came after the danger was clearly over. And the danger was not clearly over. And she was not a person who felt things before it was time to feel them. It was something smaller and quieter. The sensation of a breath taken before anyone noticed it was needed. She watched the fleet signatures. Watched them moving. Watched them becoming smaller on her display as the distance grew. Navi said into the intercom. I heard his voice was calm. I am finishing the work on the coupling. Give me another hour. I can give you 40% thrust on a standard drive. Stable, predictable, a pause. We will not be a phantom anymore. We will just be a ship. Will 40% get us out of the hollow? Yes, slowly. Slowly is excellent, she said. She sat back. How is the drive housing? Tired, he said. Like everything else. 1 more hour, she said. 1 more hour, he agreed. She ended the call, looked at her display. The fleet was still moving, still pulling back, still making the distance between them and the cache into something that felt survivable. Fra was looking at her. Fiera had been trying not to look at her for several minutes and had been unsuccessful. They are really leaving, Fra said. They are really leaving, Dara said. Because of us. Dara looked at the 43 signatures getting smaller. She thought about the Quelin, the species on 3 worlds in the system beyond the Hollow, who had been watching a VTH assault fleet build its approach for 6 months, and had no fleet of their own, and no leverage, and no options except to wait for what was coming. The fleet was not going to the Quelin system today, perhaps not tomorrow either. Word would travel. Things like this always traveled. A vet fleet withdrawing from a single vessel, unarmored, research grade, human. That was the kind of thing repeated on every trading route in the outer reach before the week was out. She thought about what that meant, not for the cash-in, for everything after the cash-in. She thought about Chella's coupling idea, and Navit's implementation, and the secondary effect that nobody had modeled, and the 40,000-kilometer lurch that had blinded the science vessel. She thought about 12 people on a patched ship with a broken coffee machine who had spent a very long day not dying through competence and improvisation and the specific human capacity for making something broken do something new. She did not let any of this show on her face. Make sure Navi gets something to eat, she said to Fiera, and see if you can do anything about the coffee machine. The news moved faster than the cash-in. There were 214 monitoring stations within relay distance of the Dela Hollow. They had all been watching. They had all been transmitting. The Galactic Council's communication network was among its many functions one of the most efficient means of distributing information in the known galaxy. Because the Council was composed of small and medium-sized species who had survived in a galaxy full of larger and more powerful ones, primarily by learning things quickly and sharing them widely. By the time the cache's drive was running on 40% stable thrust, and Naviad had emerged from the engine room floor for the first time in 9 hours, and Dra had finally gotten something approximately resembling coffee from the machine that FRA had approximately repaired. The news was already 5 relay stations out. By the time the caching cleared the hollow boundary and set a course for human space, it was everywhere. Not accurate news. The news was not accurate. The news was never accurate when it traveled this fast, because accuracy required time and verification. And neither of those was the point when the point was the shape of the thing. The outline, the essential fact too large to need the details to remain true. The essential fact was this. The Vet Dominion had withdrawn from one ship, a human ship. The details the news provided varied considerably by source. Some said the human vessel carried a weapon that folded space. Some said it had survived direct fire from the full fleet without damage. Some said it had destroyed the Dominion science vessel. Some said the captain had issued an ultimatum that was never made public. Some said the ship had simply appeared where it was, and the fleet had turned around immediately upon seeing it without exchanging fire at all. None of these were accurate. All of them were in the important sense true. The Quellan received the news before the day was out. There was a word in their language that translated roughly as the particular joy of the reprieve. Not simply relief, but the specific quality of joy that only existed because something terrible had nearly arrived and then had not. A word for the feeling of the door that opened instead of closing. They used it to name the day. They used a human word for the ship. They had no other name for it. The monitoring data showed its registry, ISV caching. They kept the name. They wrote it down. They taught it to their children in the way that small species who had survived long enough to have history taught the things that mattered. Saren, withdrawing at the front of his fleet, received the first news transmissions 2 hours into the withdrawal. He read them in his private station. He read descriptions of the human vessel, the weapon that bent space, the armor that absorbed fire, the captain's ultimatum. He sat with them for a long time. He did not correct them. He did not issue a statement. He did not contact the news relays. He did not tell anyone what he had actually seen or what his targeting officer had actually said or what the words "I cannot hit." It had felt like in a room full of officers who trusted him to have answers. He sat in his private station and read the accounts of the thing that had happened and said nothing. And the silence was the most honest thing he had done all day. On the cache in the night cycle came and the crew ate actual food for the first time in 9 hours, and Navi slept for 4 hours in his clothes, and Kella filled 17 pages of notes, and FRA fixed the coffee machine to a level of functionality that, while not impressive, was better than nothing. Dara sat on the bridge alone. She had the communications feed open at low volume, the council relay traffic, the news transmissions, the chatter from monitoring stations. She was not really listening. She was aware of it the way you were aware of weather, its presence, its direction, the general shape of what it was doing. She pulled up the sensor log from the engagement. She watched it once from beginning to end, the fleet arriving, the hail. Nav's first modification, the displacement events, the salvo that struck nothing, the science vessel going dark, the fleet turning. 11 hours compressed into a sensor record. She sat with it for a while. Then she pulled up the mission brief she had filed before departure. Survey mission, gravitational mapping, Eastern Hollow boundary, 11 days, return to Earth station. She had written it in the matter-of-fact language of a thing that was going to be straightforward and unremarkable because it had been supposed to be. She thought about retirement. She had been thinking about retirement before this mission. Not seriously. The way you noticed a chair in a shop window, knowing you could buy it. Not quite going in. She had this mission, and then the desk posting they were going to give her, and then eventually something quieter. Something that did not require her to be responsible for 12 people in a broken ship in the dark. She looked at the sensor log on her screen. She thought about the Quellan on their 3 worlds waiting for what was coming. She thought about Navi, who had taken a broken feedback loop and a dangerous idea and 8 hours of physical discomfort and turned it into something nobody had a name for yet. She thought about Sella, 17 pages of notes, into something that was going to change what humanity knew about how space moved. She thought about FRA, who had fixed the coffee machine. She closed the mission brief. She did not open the retirement file. She drank her coffee, bad, but warm and present, and sat on the bridge of the old ship, moving slowly and steadily through the edge of the hollow. Outside the viewport, the stars were the particular cold, and particular many they always were in deep space. And she looked at them for a while without thinking about anything specific. On the long range, the last of the Vet fleet signatures faded past the edge of sensor range. Gone. The cache moved on. Kororeth filed his 4th report from the observation station, and for the first time in 11 years he filed it before 300. He could not wait. He did not have the patience for 300. He filed it at 1847 and then sat at a station and watched the cache drive signature stable now. 40% thrust moving in a straight line like a ship that knew where it was going until it passed beyond his sensor range. The last line of his 4th report read as follows. The human vessel has cleared the hollow boundary under its own power and is on a course consistent with return to human space. The Vet fleet has withdrawn entirely. The Quellan system is as of this filing untouched. I have been an observer for 11 years. I have watched a great many things. I want to note for the record, and for whoever reads these reports, that I do not believe I have understood what I watched today. I have described it. I have measured it. I have filed it in the correct format with the correct timestamp, but I do not believe I understand it. I will file a full analysis when I do. He transmitted it. He sat back in his chair. He thought about the cache and about what it was. Old, small, patched 12 people. One broken coffee machine now apparently repaired. One drive that had malfunctioned into something the galaxy did not yet have a word for. He thought about the vet fleet. 43 ships. 600 years of expansion. The finest military force the outer reach had ever seen gone. He thought about the captain's face on the transmission he had watched from Sarin's feed, the public record available to all monitoring stations. When she had told the Admiral she was not authorized to discuss the vessel's capabilities, he thought about what lived behind that face. He did not know. He was fairly certain nobody knew. He thought that was probably for reasons he could not yet fully articulate the most important thing that had happened today. The Earth Research Directorate did not know what to do with the cash-in. This was not unusual. The Directorate was a large organization with very clear procedures for survey vessels returning from mapping missions. The procedures involved docking reports and equipment assessments and crew debriefs filed in a specific order and reviewed by people with specific titles and specific offices and specific hours during which they could be reached. There was a form for everything. The Directorate had been filing forms for 30 years and was exceptionally skilled at it. What it did not have a form for was this. The first signal reached Earth 3 hours before the Kakion cleared the outer beacon line. Not from the ship, from the Council relay network, which had been carrying the story for 2 days by then in all its varied and contradictory and increasingly elaborate versions. The Director's Communications Office received it, escalated it, received 4 more signals from 4 different Council members requesting clarification, escalated those, and by the time the cache was 2 hours out, the situation had moved entirely past the Directorate and was sitting on the desk of people with much larger offices and much less clear procedures for what they were looking at. They sent 3 ships to meet the cache at the beacon line. Military vessels, not large, not the heavy kind, nothing that would read as a provocation to anything watching, but clearly not survey vessels either. They formed up on either side of the Kachion as it crossed into monitored human space, one on each flank, one trailing, and Fra reported them to Dara. And Dara looked at the formation and said, "Escort," and that was the end of the conversation. They were not an honor guard. They were people trying to determine what they had. The cache docked at Kepler Station on a Tuesday. The docking itself was unremarkable. The cache had docked at Kepler Station before. It was the standard resupply point for Earth Research Directorate vessels operating in the outer reach. The docking crew knew the ship and handled the approach without difficulty. The vessel settled into berth with the particular sound of a ship that was very tired and had decided not to make a scene about it. What was remarkable was everything outside the docking bay. Dara walked out of the airlock into a corridor that had approximately 4 times as many people as it normally held. And the people included 3 individuals in military uniforms and 2 in government clothes, and one she recognized from a news briefing she had watched 8 months ago as someone who held a position with a long title and significant authority. There was also a journalist who had somehow bypassed the security checkpoint and who took 11 photographs of Dar in the first 6 seconds and was then removed. Dara looked at the people in the corridor. The people in the corridor looked at her. She said, "I would like to change my shirt first." The debrief took place in a room that was officially a conference room, and functionally a room where important people sat across a table from each other and agreed on what was true. It had good lighting, which meant the lighting was neutral and revealed nothing, and comfortable chairs, which meant the chairs were the kind that made you feel you should sit up straight. Dra sat up straight. Navid sat next to her and slouched slightly because he was Navid. Sela had her tablet and was using it openly, which the officials across the table glanced at with periodic mild concern. The people across the table included a military admiral named Harrow, a government official from the Foreign Relations Division named Stain, a scientist from the Advanced Research Division whose name Da had not caught, and a woman at the end of the table who had not been introduced, and who carried the quality of someone who did not need to be. Admiral Harrow spoke first. He was a careful man, compact, somewhere in his late 50s, with the specific manner of someone who had spent a career reading rooms and knew he was reading this one. He asked them to walk him through the incident from the beginning. He used the word incident, not engagement, not conflict. Incident. Dar walked him through it. She was thorough, she was clear, she did not embellish, and she did not reduce. She explained the drive malfunction and the feedback loop, and Sella's suggestion about the propulsion coupling, and Nav's implementation, and the unintended side effects, and the Vet fleet response, and the conversation with Sarin, and the accidental displacement that had blinded the science vessel, and the fleet withdrawal, and the drive stabilization, and the return. She told all of it. When she finished, the room was quiet. Harrow looked at the table for a moment, then at her. "Let me confirm what you are telling me," he said. "Yes," she said, "the drive malfunctioned. Yes, the engineer improvised a repair that created an unintended gravitational effect. Yes, the ship could not be targeted as a result of this effect. That is what Sella's analysis indicates." She said, "You should read her paper. It is thorough. The Vet Dominion's fleet fired a full salvo and missed because the ship displaced at the moment of firing. The ship displaced because Navied released a coupling to prevent the array from burning out." She said, "The timing was coincidental." Harrow looked at Navi. Navied nodded. "I did not know they were firing," he said. "I was in the floor." Another silence. "The science vessel was disabled," Harrow said, "by a shockwave generated when the engineer was implementing a secondary modification. Configuration 3, Navied said helpfully. "I would not have predicted the amplitude spike. In retrospect, I should have modeled the secondary coupling interaction more carefully." The scientist at the end of the table made a sound. Harrow looked at him. The scientist composed himself. "I apologize," he said. "Continue." Harrow turned back to Dara, and then the fleet withdrew. "Yes. Because of what they believed about the vessel, I assume so," Dar said. "I cannot say precisely what they believed. I told the Admiral I was not authorized to discuss the vessel's capabilities, which was accurate. I am not in fact authorized to discuss capabilities we do not possess." And then he left. Harrow looked at her for a long moment. "Captain Solon," he said, "that is the story that is going to be very difficult to tell." Dara looked at him steadily. "That is the story that happened," she said. The woman at the end of the table wrote something down. The official account was classified at level 4 indefinitely. The cache and crew signed documents. The documents were long and precise about what could not be said and to whom. Navid signed his without reading it, which was his standard approach to paperwork. Chella read hers 3 times and asked 2 clarifying questions about whether the classification applied to scientific publications or only personal statements, because she had 17 pages of notes on the gravitational fold mechanism and intended to publish them. The official told her the science could be published without operational context. She said the science was the operational context. The official said she would need to work with the Advanced Research Division on appropriate framing. She said fine, she had the mathematics. The framing was secondary. The paper she eventually published was titled Anomalous Metric Distortion, as a byproduct of feedback loop amplification in gravity mapping arrays, observations from the Dealer Hollow survey. It was 46 pages long. It contained 17 diagrams and 1 footnote that read in its entirety. The author acknowledges that the practical implications of this work are significant and wishes to note that they were entirely unintentional. It won every award available in human physics that year. 3 of those awards had not previously been given to a living recipient. The Veth Dominion issued a statement 8 days after the fleet withdrawal. The statement was measured formal. It used the phrase tactical reassessment 4 times. It did not mention the cache by name. It did not mention Admiral Serene by name. It described the withdrawal as a deliberate pause in operations pending analysis of new data, the kind of language that required a great deal of careful construction and communicated in its very carefulness the shape of what had actually happened. No one believed the statement. No one said they did not believe it, because diplomatic relations required that everyone pretend to accept official statements, even when those statements described as a tactical reassessment what had clearly been a fleet of 43 warships turning around because they could not determine what one small ship was doing. Sarin's removal from command was announced 2 weeks later. The official reason was health. The announcement used the word retirement. There was no ceremony. He went to a colony world in the inner reach and was not heard from again. When journalists attempted to find him, they found a man who had nothing to say, and said it in a way that made clear he intended to continue saying it for the remainder of his life. He had served the Dominion for 22 years with complete distinction. Nobody wrote much about that part. The diplomatic contacts began arriving before the cash was unloaded. 14 species, council members mostly, with 2 independent systems that were not council members, but had been watching the relay traffic and had drawn their own conclusions and wanted to draw them in the direction of Earth. The contact requests were formally worded, but their meaning was transparent in the way formally worded things were always transparent to anyone paying attention. We would like to know you better than we did before last week. The Foreign Relations Division was not prepared for 14 simultaneous contact requests. They were prepared for 1 or 2. They had protocols for 1 or 2. For 14, they had to improvise, which was not a word the Foreign Relations Division used comfortably, but which was under the circumstances the only available option. Stain, the official from the debrief, spent 3 weeks doing almost nothing else. He reported to his supervisor that the volume and quality of incoming diplomatic interest was unlike anything he had encountered in 15 years of the position. His supervisor asked what had changed. Stain looked at him for a moment. The Veth withdrew, he said, from a survey ship. Everything that thought it understood where humanity ranked has to recalculate. His supervisor considered this. We should be careful, he said. We do not want them to believe we are more than we are. Stain thought about a woman in a conference room telling an admiral that the story that happened was the story that happened. He thought about an engineer in a ship's floor improvising in the dark. He thought about a researcher with 17 pages of notes and the absolute steadiness of someone who had just watched a miracle and was already working out the mathematics. I am not certain, he said carefully, that we know yet what we are. He went back to the contact requests. The Quellan ambassador reached Earth 6 weeks after the incident. She was the first Quellan to visit. Her species had not had contact with humanity before the survey mission. They lived far out on the edge of contested space, and the practical opportunities had not previously presented themselves. She arrived at the Earth Diplomatic Reception Facility on a morning in early spring. The receiving official shook her hand. She held the handshake slightly longer than protocol required. We named the day, she said. Her translator gave her voice a soft, resonant quality. The day the fleet turned. We named it, I heard the official said. We also named the ship. She looked at him. Her eyes were large and amber, the eyes of something that had spent a long evolutionary history watching the horizon for things that might be arriving. In our language, it means something like the one that did not know it was dangerous. The official smiled. That may be the most accurate description I have heard. Is the captain here? The Quellan ambassador asked. She is not on Earth, the official said. She left 3 days ago. The ambassador tilted her head. For where? Another survey mission, the official said. Different sector mapping work. The ambassador was quiet for a moment. She went back. She said after all of that, the Kepler drift anomalies were not going to map themselves, the official said. And her engineer had fixed the drive properly this time, so she did not see a reason to wait. The ambassador looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something in her own language before the translator caught up. 4 words soft that the translator rendered as, yes, that makes sense. Core filed his final report on the incident 63 days after the cache left the Hollow. It was the longest report he had ever written. It was also the last report he wrote from the observation platform at the edge of the Deller system, because 3 weeks after the incident, the Council had decided the station required a senior observer, and Core, after 11 years of careful and thorough and completely unread work, was being transferred to a more prominent posting. He was not certain how he felt about this. He filed the report anyway. He was careful with it. He took his time. He included everything: the sensor data, the timeline, the vet fleet movements, the displacement events, the firing solutions that failed, the science vessel going dark, the withdrawal, the news traffic, the diplomatic contacts, the Quellan ambassador's statement. He included everything except the last section, which he wrote separately after all the rest was done, which was not really analysis and not really observation, and which he filed because he had decided he owed it to the record to say what he actually thought, even if what he thought was not the kind of thing observers were supposed to put in reports. It read as follows: I have studied humanity for 11 years. In that time, I have filed 2,247 reports. I have catalogued their vessel traffic, their survey patterns, their diplomatic contacts, their rate of expansion and resource consumption as they moved gradually through the outer reach. I have described them in my reports as a minor species, spacefaring for 2 centuries, no significant military presence, no territorial holdings, no particular leverage in council politics. I have described them as non-threatening. I am revising that assessment not because of what their ship did in the Deller Hollow. I have considered the incident carefully, and I believe I understand what happened. A malfunctioning drive, an improvised repair, a series of unintended consequences that a vet fleet could not classify and therefore could not address. It was not a demonstration of military capability. It was not a test. It was not a strategy. That is in fact the reason I am revising my assessment. A species with a plan is legible. You can read a plan. You can build a response to a plan. You can anticipate what they will do next if you understand what they are attempting. What I watched in the Deller Hollow was not a plan. It was 12 people in a broken ship doing whatever was necessary for as long as was necessary with whatever they had. The engineer did not know what he was building. The captain did not know what she was protecting. Scientists did not know what she was discovering. They were trying to go home, and they could not be stopped. I want to be precise about this because I believe precision matters here. The Vet Dominion has fought 17 major engagements in the last century. In every engagement, they prevailed because they had greater force or superior positioning or better numbers. Force and positioning and numbers are things you can plan for. They are things you can counter. You cannot counter 12 people who do not stop. You cannot target improvisation. You cannot build a firing solution against a species whose primary response to being in danger is to fix things. I am recommending Level 1 monitoring of all human vessels effective immediately. I'm also recommending that the Council review its classification of humanity as a minor species. I do not believe that classification is accurate. I do not believe it has been accurate for some time. I believe we have been observing the wrong things. I want to note for the record that I asked Captain Solon through an intermediary after the incident whether the encounter had frightened her. She said, "We were more worried about the coffee machine. It has been broken since Tuesday." I have been thinking about that answer for 63 days. I am still thinking about it. I do not know precisely what it means. I know it means something. I know that a species whose captain, after 11 hours of surviving something that caused a Veth fleet to withdraw, is primarily focused on the state of the coffee machine, is a species that is not finished, surprising anyone. I know that much. End of report. The cache reached the Kepler drift on a Thursday. The drive was running clean. Navid had spent 2 weeks at Kepler Station with 3 other engineers and a diagnostic suite newer than anything on board. The result was a propulsion system that functioned the way it was supposed to function, which was stable and predictable and not at all like what it had done in the Hollow. He had also quietly documented his notes on the grav array modification and sent them to Cella, who had incorporated them into a supplemental appendix to her paper. The Kepler drift was a wide band of young stellar material, gas clouds and protostars, and gravitational eddies that made survey work slow and the results scientifically significant. Nobody had properly mapped it. It was exactly the kind of place the Kachelon had been built for. Dara stood at the viewport on the first morning and looked at it. It was not scenic, the way planets were scenic. It was large and dark, and full of things that would take months to measure and longer to understand. And the light that moved through it was the scattered indirect light of a region still determining what it was going to be. She thought it was beautiful. "Drive is ready," Navid said from behind her. He had coffee. The machine had been working since Fra fixed it, and Dar had decided she was giving Fra accommodation when they got back because some things mattered. "Good." She said Sella has already begun a preliminary scan from Doc and has 17 hypotheses she wants to test. "Of course she does. Fra wants to know if we are running a standard survey grid or something custom." "Custom," Dara said. "Start at the eastern edge, work inward course plotted." She looked at the drift for another moment, at the dark and the scattered light and the slow, ancient process of matter becoming something it was not yet. "Let us not die today," she said. "Working on it," Navid said. The Kashan moved into the dark. Behind it, the stars were the same cold and particular many they always were in deep space. And ahead, the drift waited, with 11 months of work inside it. And somewhere far back across the outer reach, a Veth dominion was examining sensor data it could not explain, and 14 species were filing diplomatic requests. An AQ Quelin ambassador was telling the story to everyone who would listen, and a council observer was on his way to a new posting with 63 days of thinking he had not yet finished. The Kashan did not know any of that. It just moved forward the way it always had, old, patched, slightly improbable, full of people with things to do, into the dark, into whatever came next. If this story hit you the way it hit me, then you already know what to do. Hit the like button and let the algorithm know that humans doing impossible things with broken engines and sheer refusal to stop is exactly the kind of story the galaxy needs more of. And if you want to be the first to know every time a new story drops here, then subscribe right now so you never miss what comes next. The Kashan is not done, and neither are